So we're going to start by looking at the seasoning defects. Okay, so there's a couple of different defects that can happen when we're seasoning the timber. Okay, so as we said before, as Jack said there, seasoning is basically the drying out of timber. Okay, whenever we cut them. So conversion is cutting the logs into planks, and seasoning then is drying the planks. Okay, so stresses that result from incorrect seasoning and poor stacking is basically where we get seasoning defects. Okay. So by stresses, it's kind of like mistakes or something, okay? So it's incorrect seasoning, so maybe we're not seasoning them properly, or maybe they're not stacked properly with the stickers in between them, okay? So the first one here is springing. Okay, so springing happens when the edges of the boards bend inwards, okay? And then the faces stay flat. So basically here, what you can see, if a board springs, basically what's happening is the middle is pushing out to one direction, where the two ends is kind of going in the other direction. Okay, so it basically just bends the piece of wood. Okay, that's called springing. All right. Then the second one then is warping. Okay, warping is when the ends of the board twist in opposite directions. So if we take this end of this plank here, you can see one end, if you like, the left hand side is kind of twisting up the way, and the right hand side is twisting down the way. This is called warping. Okay. So that is called warping. Now the second slide then, we're going to look at the third one is cupping. Okay, so cupping is probably one of the most popular ones that come up, so that's why I've left it on a slide of its own here. Okay, so cupping happens when the end of the boards look like a curve or a C shape or a U shape. Okay, so they curve. So unlike warping, cupping, the two ends go in the same direction. Okay, so they don't go in opposite directions, they go in the same direction. Okay, you can see here by the arrows. Now, the second point here, when we're gluing boards together to form a kind of bigger panel, okay, so basically we're gluing two boards together, board A and board B, the boards are turned so that the growth rings, or the annual rings, of each are alternate as shown to minimize cupping. Okay, so basically if I give you two pieces of boards and I ask you to glue them together, you will have the end grains going in different directions. So for example, if I take this one on the left hand side, the end grains kind of going in more of a U shape like this. Okay, so then the next one, I suppose it's an N shape. Okay, so the next one then is going in the U shape. Okay, so they're going in different directions. All right, we'll learn more about that next year. All right, but what you need to remember is that cupping is when the two ends of the boards go in the same direction. Okay. Okay. Moving on to the fourth one. The fourth one's called bowing. Okay. So bowing is when the full length of the board bends, basically. Okay. So this is a full length of a board, and both ends of the board go in the same direction. It's basically like cupping, but cupping goes the shorter distance here, whereas bowing goes the full length of the plank. Okay. Again, the cause for bowing would be poor stacking when seasoning. Okay, the spacing between the stickers may be too large. So basically, there was no sticker here in the middle, so the board was able to bend or bow. Okay, so that is bowing. Now, we have three more I think to look at. The next one here is honeycomb checks. Okay, so honeycomb checks, if you look at the board here, they're these kind of, I've highlighted them in black. Okay, so there's two on this piece of wood here in the end grain. Okay, so they're internal fibers that are split. Okay, so basically when fibers inside the wood split, the inside dries too quickly before the outside. Okay, it causes a crack inside. How could you prevent this? You could use the correct drying schedule. In other words, not to dry it out too quickly. Okay, so maybe if you're drying it in a kiln, you'll give it heat slowly. Okay, so that's a honeycomb check. So it's just like a crack inside. Okay, and you can see here there's two little cracks here in the end grain, and we've highlighted them in black. All right, now the last two are, we've seen one of them before actually. The first one here is case hardening. Okay, so what is case hardening? So if you just ignore the image for a minute, it's basically when the moisture becomes trapped in the center of the board, so deep inside the middle of the board, while the surface is dry. Okay, the stresses are created as a result. Okay, so basically what case hardening is that the outside of this board is dry, but in the middle it's still not fully dry. Okay, and what you see here is like a little experiment that we do. So we cut a slot out here. Okay, we leave the piece of wood maybe overnight. You come back and look at it. If this happens, basically the two ends of the board here join in to meet each other to close the gap. Basically that means the board is not fully dry in the center, and it means case hardening has happened. Okay, if you cut this slot out on a fully dried piece of wood, nothing would happen, no change would happen. It means the wood is fully dry. Okay, so the boards will bend when the stresses are released if the wood is not fully dry in the center. Okay, and again, similar to all the rest of them, a prevention method would be to use the correct drying schedule, just so you're not drying too quickly. And you give it time. Here it's more about giving it the time so that the center dries out. Okay, and the final one here is just end splitting. So it's just when the ends of the wood split. So if you remember back to our previous chapters, we talked about 3 different methods for stopping the ends splitting, and they were to paint the ends, or put a metal cleat on the ends, or maybe put a cloth over the ends when we're seasoning them. Okay, so the ends of the board are exposed to sun and they dry out too quickly, so they crack. So again, that's why we paint them, or put a metal cleat over them, or a cloth, so the sun doesn't directly meet them. Okay, prevention methods, again, I already said this. This is a revision for you. Paint the ends, use a metal cleat, or use a cloth. Okay, so that is the second part to the seasoning, or to the wood defects. Okay, that is seasoning defects.